Hello, Willow Park Church Creekside. Thank you for coming to watch this sermon. At Willow Park Church, we are one church across 3 locations in the Okanagan Valley, and our goal for our church is for people to come to know Jesus. If you have questions about Creekside or even our church as a whole, I encourage you to go to willowparkchurch.com to find out more information about us or even to reach out. In the meantime, enjoy the sermon. Hopefully you feel empowered and enriched by it, and hopefully it draws you closer to Jesus.
I have connections with this church that go back a number of years, and so it always feels good to come back here. And it seems lately I've been back here quite often. Usually it's with Curtis and being part of a worship team. But it feels good to be here. I have never grown tired of that drive from Kelowna to Lake Country on a Sunday morning. I know that road is different Monday to Friday. I've been on it sometimes during the wrong time. But even the drive itself is sort of, to me, a preparation, especially on a Sunday morning, to speak of the goodness of God and to think about His goodness to me and to share that. Now, Jeremy gave all of us who are going to be speaking the next couple of months, he sent us a memo. And the memo had some fairly specific instructions on it, and one of them was related to time. And if I remember the memo correctly, it was like, try to keep it to 25 minutes. So, now I'm not going to promise that. So I'm going to have to ask for a little bit of grace even before I start. And don't put me on the clock yet. But I will try to honor that request this morning. He also mentioned that over the next few months, you'll have the opportunity to hear different perspectives on various passages of the Gospel of Mark. Now, it would be very interesting if we all spoke on exactly the same passage. That would truly be interesting. But this morning, I will say, and say yes, you will certainly at some point say, okay, well, Doug, that's your perspective. I'm not 100% sure if I fall in line with that, but you know what? That's 100% okay with me. Seems to me on the key things on the Christian faith that we fall in line with. And there are things sort of out in the periphery that we may have slightly different opinions. I thought, this week, if we were asked to sum up the overarching narrative of the Bible in one word, what word would you choose? And so there are some words on the screen behind me: forgiveness, redemption, love, reconciliation, judgment, restoration. Now, there's one that I don't see there that should be on there, unless I forgot to send that word, because it's really the word I want to talk a bit about this morning, and that's the word healing. And of all those words, if there is one word that might beg the question, so what do you mean by that? It would likely be the word healing. What do you mean? What kind of healing are you talking about? I think without a doubt, if the Christian faith if Jesus himself said to everyone, I will guarantee you one miraculous healing in your life, there would likely be a lineup of people ready to enlist and say, count me in then. But I think it also begs the question, how many of those people, even if that offer was true, would also go on to be true, faithful followers of Jesus? And how many would simply cash in on their miracle and then very quickly distance themselves from the miracle worker? Reminds me a little bit maybe about the TELUS salesperson that quite often comes to our door with a special offer. And it would kind of be like me saying, yes, you know what, I'll take that special offer because it gives me short-term benefit. But knowing full well in my heart that I have absolutely no commitment to TELUS long-term whatsoever. Today's passage recounts another miraculous physical healing. But I guess my message this morning is that it is much more than that. It's much deeper than that. And if we only focus on the healing, we will miss the point of this miracle and virtually every other miracle that Jesus performed. I mean, throughout Mark's gospel, often in rapid succession, we are confronted with stories of Jesus doing things that supposedly only God could do. That included signs, and it certainly included healing. But perhaps more significantly, it included the authority to forgive sins. Something that only God was supposed to be able to do. And every miracle, every sign, every wonder was meant to demonstrate and give credibility to the most significant claim that Jesus ever made. That if you have seen me, you have seen God. That the Father and I are one. So yes, on one level, this story is about one man's physical healing. But essentially, it is a story about the healer. It's about Jesus. It's about who he is. And it begs the question of what's your response to him? The text this morning is relatively short, and it is, you might say, straightforward. It's a very human story of a man whose life is about to change in ways that he would have never dreamed possible. It's the story of a powerful, compassionate God in union with a powerful, compassionate Jesus, acting on behalf of a desperate man living a compromised life. So let's read the text. Mark chapter 7, verses 31 to 37. Then he, that's Jesus, left the region of Tyre and went through Sidon back to Galilee Lake. You can tell as soon as you heard Galilee Lake that probably I was not using a regular translation. And over to the district of the 10 towns. In your Bible, it might say Decapolis. And some people brought a man who could neither hear nor speak and asked Jesus to lay a healing hand on him. So he took the man off by himself, put his fingers in the man's ears, some spit on the man's tongue. And then Jesus looked up in prayer, groaned mightily, I think some Bibles would say sighed, and commanded, "Open up." And it happened. The man's hearing was clear and his speech was plain. Just like that. Jesus urged them to keep it quiet, as he often did, but they talked it up all the more, beside themselves with excitement. He's done it all and done it well. He gives hearing to the deaf and speech to the speechless. That's the story. I want to admit, having grown up in the church, it's very easy for me to read these stories without realizing how dramatic they were. How this very compromised life is within an instant exchanged for a life that is fully functioning and whole. And the impact of that, not only on the man himself, but on his friends who brought him, on his family, and likely on the entire community in which he lived. So we do need to pause and let the reality of the miracle sink in, and to go, wow. It's amazing. Many of us know somebody who could use such a healing. I have a granddaughter who could use such a miracle, such a touch from God. But the physical desperation of this one man mirrors or parallels the spiritual need of every man, woman, and child. The need for an inner spiritual healing, something also that only God, through Jesus, can give. And while Jesus can heal the lame, he can cause the blind to see and the deaf to hear, it is often people whose eyes and ears and limbs work perfectly fine who are most resistant to the healing that Jesus came to bring. Partly because they would perhaps deny that there is anything wrong with them. So perhaps the greatest miracle, and most of the songs we sang this morning talk about that miracle of people with 20/20 vision and perfect hearing, having their eyes and ears opened up to the reality of who Jesus is and the kingdom he's invited us to join. The miracle of a heart that was perhaps hard or resistant to God having those walls broken down and saying, Jesus, I want in. Jesus performed many miracles. I think it's in the Gospel of John that says, if we were to record them all, we'd run out of pages. So we actually just have a few. But Jesus was not primarily on a healing crusade. Jesus was on a mission of reconciliation, of drawing people to the God who created us and gave us life in the first place. That in Jesus we might see, and that through Jesus we might embrace newness of life itself. And so this morning, while we need to marvel at the miracle, and you might say just be excited for this one man, this morning we are reminded to embrace the healer. Embrace Jesus. To believe in him and to truly follow him, not because we might gain physical healing, but because we believe what Jesus said about himself is true. When he said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, I am the open door to God the Father. When Jesus wept over the city, he did so not because people were sick. He did so not because people had their issues. He wept over the city because they were lost. They were aimless. They were like sheep without a shepherd. And the miracles recorded are intended to have our eyes and ears opened to the miracle of the gift of grace that God has given to us in Jesus. And Jesus often said, give them eyes to see. I know their physical eyes work. Give them eyes to see, give them ears to hear. Now, I will admit it's hard to read the story without asking a few questions. And though I don't have the answers to the questions, I am going to ask them anyway. Why did Jesus put his fingers in the man's ears? Why did Jesus put spit on the man's tongue? What was that all about? Both actions, you would have to admit, appear to have a very low level of medical sophistication. But it's what Jesus did. And I don't know if there were aspects of those actions that paralleled some of the medical practice of the day, some of which we would have found very odd. But I have no idea if that's the case. And I want to say this morning, I don't think it matters. But what I find noteworthy is that it is when Jesus looked up to heaven and sighed and groaned, the man's eyes, the man's speech, the man's ears were immediately healed. To me, when I read that, it is Jesus connecting with God the Father. And you might say it's Jesus in union with God the Father, doing something that only God could do. It is Jesus acknowledging God, and at the same time, it's God the Father acknowledging Jesus. And although he didn't use the words, to me it's the same as when he said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Believe him. Follow him." So it likely has nothing to do with touching his ears. Likely has nothing to do with saliva. And it could be that at some point in my life, somebody will point something out to me and I say, oh, maybe my perspective will change on that. But at this point, it is all about an all-powerful, compassionate God in union with an all-powerful, compassionate Jesus. Intervening on behalf of this one man. But it is also God and Jesus intervening on behalf of all of us. Jesus, who gave himself in order that we might believe, and that in believing we would find life, and that we would gain life eternal, where all of our eyes and all of our ears and all of our flaws will find perfection. So what do we do with the story? Is it meant in any way to be prescriptive in terms of how to pray for or how to get a miracle on behalf of someone who is sick? If it's not about the touch and it's not about the saliva, is it about shouting with a loud voice? The answer to those questions, in my humble opinion, is no. Jesus actually healed in many different ways. I think we do the gospel. I think we do the Christian faith. I think we do Jesus himself a disservice when we pick out a few details from one narrative and formulate a theology or practice around them. And it happens all the time. In fact, I believe it ultimately does more to harm people, to mess them up, than to heal them and make them whole. That the healing itself can become a distraction from the healer. You know, I grew up in Chilliwack in the 1950s. That's a long time ago. In the 50s, television was the technology of the day. It was exciting. And in our home, it was deemed to be probably not good. So we didn't have one for a while. But you know, it didn't take long when television personalities would manipulate that technology and manipulate the gospel for personal gain. And I remember, even as a child or as a teenager seeing shows where the person on the screen would ask you to reach out and touch the screen for your healing. Healing charades that still happen today. It reflects the danger, I believe, of fixating on the healing rather than embracing the healer who was willing to walk a path of pain and suffering. A few weeks ago, we heard about John the Baptist. I sometimes read that story of his beheading and think, Jesus, would that not have been a good man to save? I think about all the early Christians who gave their lives. And so often in North America, we want to focus on how do we get my supernatural miracle. And we forget about the miracle that God has given to us in Jesus. Do I pray for healing? Yes, I do. But my lasting and deeper prayer is that God would heal the hearts of those whose eyes still do not see and whose ears still do not hear. And some of those people are close to me. That's a prayer I need to continue praying and ask God to help me in whatever way to point them, to draw them to the truth of the goodness of God and the grace of Jesus. And finally, in this brief account, as in so many others, we find people who didn't need healing acting on behalf of a friend who did. And that story is repeated often. And I thought, even as the deaf, the lame, the blind needed someone to say, hey, come with me. I know where he is. There are spiritually needy people needing someone to point them to Jesus. Somebody to draw them to a place where they can hear of the goodness of God. To hear that sin and its guilt, that a life of regret, bitterness, and perhaps brokenness, that there is a place you can find healing for your soul. All of that can be brought to Jesus and humbly laid before him at the cross. The love of Jesus will step in, not only with forgiveness, but with an invitation into the very kingdom of God. And we are an expression of that kingdom as we sit here this morning. For God, the creator of all things, invites us in and calls us sons and daughters, and invites us to call him Father. Yes, Jesus was and is a miracle worker. Yes, even the wind and the waves obeyed him. Yes, Jesus performed supernatural signs, but he did not come in order to establish a kingdom where signs and wonders were the main order of business or preoccupation. He came to establish a kingdom in which ordinary, flawed, physically and spiritually compromised people would be invited in and welcomed into a kingdom where sins are forgiven, both past and present. A kingdom where the humble would be exalted and where compassion would reign. Where love, joy, peace, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, patience, self-control, and goodness would be in the DNA of all of its citizens. Those are the fruits of the Spirit in the life of a child of God. And most of us would acknowledge in this room that we have said yes to Jesus. That we acknowledge that He is the way, He is the truth, He is the life. But if it's not true for you, I simply want to repeat what John, I think, said at the end of his gospel. All these things, all the things he wrote, all the things Mark recorded, have been written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may find life in His name. I don't know if anybody was timing me, but right up there. That's right in my face, and I didn't notice it. A few weeks ago, I think it was on a Monday night, I went to bed feeling not well. And it seems to me the older I get, if I get sick, the more questions I have is, well, is it nothing or is it like serious? So anyway, I had a rough night, did not sleep well. I spent the entire next day flat in bed. Really, all I did was lie in bed and drink water. Then I slept that night. Wednesday morning, I woke up and for the most part, embraced life. So thinking about this morning, I thought we need to even see that as a miracle of God. We have not made ourselves, He has made us. And incredibly, while I lay there and drank water, healing was happening in my body that I had nothing to do with. So we need, even in the ordinary things of life, to acknowledge the miraculous hand of God. This morning we're going to share in communion. It's a reminder of the cost of our forgiveness. What it costs for us to be reconciled to God, to be restored. And ultimately, it's a reminder of God's love for us. And I pray that that would kind of sink in for all of us this morning maybe in a fresh way. Father, I thank you for this morning, and I thank you for your word. Father, I thank you that these words are meant to give us life. So, Father, would you feed that life into our soul this morning and help us rejoice in who we are as children of the Most High God. Amen.